Hello everyone, this is my second video. I'm going to elaborate what I was talking about in the first video, which was called Jung and Christianity, Archetypes. This is going to be Archetypes continued. Jung was a psychologist, and psyche in Greek, the Greek word psyche means soul. So the behaviorist, and then ology at the end of psychology means the study of, so psychology is the study of the soul. There is a psychology without the soul, and most modern day psychology really doesn't pay attention to the soul. There were the behaviorists in the 50s and 60s. They sort of dominated academic psychology, and all they did was study mice. So they'd see what a mouse does in a maze, and they'd generalize and say that's how we as humans, this great personality structure we have, this great mind, all culture can be boiled down to what rats do in a maze. It's like as if there was a zombie apocalypse and a guy sees a zombie burst through his house door, and he takes a machete and chops off the zombie's head and kills him. All the behaviorists, or a psychology without the soul, would care about was the stimulus and the response. The stimulus, the guy seeing the zombie, and the response, him killing him with a machete. All the other things about the guy's mind wouldn't matter. How maybe he prayed when he saw the zombie, or how he'd been thinking about how zombies had taken over the world and maybe ate his wife and his little kid. And he might have been thinking about the book of Revelation, the end of the world happening with the zombies. But Jung was different. His was a psychology with the soul. He stressed the soul's, or the psyche's, major accomplishments in culture, such as religion, the myths, art, and so forth. Freud was a reductionist too, really. He didn't think too much of the soul. He was actually an atheist. And he would take any psychological phenomenon, religion, art, whatever, the things that Jung really prized, and he would reduce them all to the sexual instinct. So he would take Picasso, all these great paintings, these wonderful works of modern art, and he'd reduce them all to being explained by Picasso's sexuality. And he did the same thing with religion and art. Hinduism is nothing but the expression of sexuality, Buddhism, and so forth. Now, Jung's father was a pastor, and many of his relatives were leaders in the church. But Jung noticed that his dad's religion was dead. His dad was a very morose, neurotic, dull kind of person. And Jung would ask him as a boy questions about the Christian religion, and his father would say, "You ask too many questions. You're not supposed to think. You're supposed to believe." So Jung's father's religion was basically just a bunch of stale doctrines, like it happens today in the church. It's the difference between reading about the Jesus changing water to wine in the Gospel of John at the wedding of Cana, and reading it maybe if you've been a Christian for a long time, you've been overexposed to this story. You may have read it like 10, 20, or 30 times. And so it loses some of its punch, some of its oomph. And it's the difference between that, just reading it, and if you were really there at the wedding and actually saw Jesus, saw his expression, saw the divinity in him, saw the wine change to water and everyone amazed, and actually tasted the water. So yeah, Jung wanted an actual living religion. He was interviewed near the end of his life, and the interviewer asked him a question. He said, "Do you believe in God?" And Jung said, "I don't have to believe, I know. I know." So Jung really experienced God and the divine through his own psyche, which is really the only way we experience anything. It's the difference between seeing a B-horror flick about a zombie apocalypse It's really dull, it's boring, bad writing, bad directing, bad acting, and then actually living in a zombie apocalypse. That's what Jung wanted, for religion and Christianity to be real. In the last video I compared the unconscious to an iceberg. Freud's unconscious was a personal unconscious. It was just things we've repressed, memories we've repressed in our life, and he called it the id, and it's basically a demon. He had a very negative view of the unconscious. Like a woman may have seen a handsome man riding a horse and she had sexual feelings for him. It was the Victorian era, so she couldn't accept the sexuality in her, so she repressed the whole scene. And then she comes to Freud with the neurotic symptom that she's petrified of horses. Jung's unconscious was called the collective unconscious. He had a dream about it. Jung often had dreams which presaged his developments in his psychological theory. He dreamed that he was in his house on the first floor and everything was normal, but he saw a door leading down some steps, and he went down and he found himself in a room which was decorated in a medieval fashion. He had a suit of armor, planks on the walls. Then he went down the steps again and he found himself in a pagan temple with pillars and statues of the Greek gods and so forth. Then he saw a slab in the floor, and he was very curious, and he opened it and went down, and now he found himself in like a very primitive world with dirt floors, bones, primitive tools, caveman writing on the walls. So this is the whole idea that the caveman is in us, in our unconscious, in the collective unconscious, as is the pagan and the Middle Ages, and everything mankind has lived through history, we inherit in our unconscious. I said last time that the archetypes are everywhere in the Bible. We have the God, devil, Eve, Goliath, even Jesus. All these are archetypal symbols in our unconscious. And that's why the Bible can actually approach the infinite mind of God, because there's hundreds of these major symbols in it which are still in us and therefore speak to us. And when you put them all together and connect them and put them into a system or an organic growth, then it truly, what we can get out of the Bible, the Word of God, does approach infinity. It approaches the mind of God as His self, which is why we could say that God wrote it, that God's mind is in it. Now remember, everyone, Jung's map of the soul does describe the psyche, the mind, your psyche. It's not just theories he came with out of the blue. You can actually experience it, like how the unconscious can communicate with us, which it usually does through symbols. For example, I myself have experienced many of the Jungian concepts in my own psychology. Last week, I kept getting images in my imagination of fruit, like I would picture bananas or cherries or a bushel of apples, and I was wondering what the unconscious is trying to show me. And it turns out that when I thought and reflected on what could fruit mean, that means fruitfulness. And indeed, during that period, I was having a very fruitful time psychologically and spiritually. Big things were happening, big changes taking place in my psychology. And so the unconscious was trying to show me that by these images it was producing in me of fruit. So I hope you liked the video. That's all I have for now. If you would like, please leave a comment. I'd like to hear from you, and I'll see you next time.